So a lot of you have been asking for some more big scale content. Now there aren't really that many kits that are readily available and too cheap that are really big too. Now luckily Agoramodels contacted me if I wanted to work together on building one of their newly released kits. It's the Mustang GT500 and then specifically the Supersnake version. So let's dive into the first package to see what's inside and then get started on the build. The Mustang that we're going to be building is a 1/8 scale kit. It's pretty much a monthly subscription. You can buy the whole package at once also, but you can decide to do it on a monthly basis as well to split your payments and make it a bit more durable on the wallet every month. So in each package you get a couple different smaller packages with sub-assemblies. In this case we're just going to get a couple parts for the doors, even some of the door cards and some seats to get a feel for the actual build itself. Following along with the instructions, we're just going to start with the first package, and that is in this case the front bumper. Most of the parts are either a snap together or screwed together in place with a couple of screws here and there, and maybe even some parts that snap on as well. So during the entire build, everything will be screwed together. I'm just not really going to be showing it as it's pretty repetitive, just me applying some pressure to a screwdriver and just turning that screw in. So I'm just going to do the satisfactory way of showing how to build, and that is pretty much just by putting all the parts together and moving on to the next one. If you are interested in the Agoramodels catalog or just want to know more about the company or this specific kit, I will of course be leaving links in the description for you to check out. So with the front bumper and the door now fully assembled, I could move on to some interior pieces, and that in this case is the door panel itself. Now with the door panel in place, it's time to move on to the seat. This is also again made out of multiple components, and it is also a bit functional as well, with the back rest or the seat rest being foldable or semi-foldable too. Okay, just hold on for a bit. Of course we're not going to build a Mustang stock, so let's just rewind this and start all over again. So I decided just to step out of the norm a bit and not go for the stock version on this big kit, but just give it a custom touch and change some colors here and there. So I decided to disassemble all the parts for the interior and repaint it. After disassembling all of the pieces, I gave them a quick scuff for the primer to stick nicely to it, then applied a couple light coats of Tamiya gray primer. With this being a Mustang, I thought a really fitting color would be a saddle tan. So after priming, I let the parts dry for a couple of hours and then moved on to applying multiple coats of the saddle tan color until it was fully covered. All of the parts were painted at the same time in the same color, so that took a bit of time. After letting the paint cure for a couple of days, I moved on to assembling it all back together again. So all of the chrome pieces were snapped in place, and then I just followed along with the instructions by putting all the parts together one by one. So some of the trim was a screw together, and the other trim I removed wasn't really supposed to be removed, so that needs to be glued back in place. Small details that were on the parts were of course removed after applying primer and paint to them, so they needed to be reapplied. I'm just applying some silver touches here and there to give it a nice fresh look. The door panels are now assembled, and so are the seats, so we could move on to the bigger interior tub, starting with the front panel with some carpeting and the shifter. On these bigger scale kits, there mostly is some electronics included as well, specifically for some sound and also some lighting. In this case, I'm going to be applying the pedals, and these are actually controlling some of the taillights, and also later on there will be a horn included too. With the first part of the interior now finished, I could move on to the dashboard, but we're not going to leave that stock either. There was a bit of a mold line visible on that top edge, which I wanted to have removed, and I also wanted to have it two-toned to match with the rest of the interior. So the top section was painted black, and the lower inlay section was painted in a sandal tan to match the seats and the door panels. After letting the paint cure, some of the original parts needed to be stuck back in place with a bit of glue, and the others could be snapped and screwed on too. For some additional details on the interior, there is of course the gauge cluster. There were some stickers included, and these were put in place one by one. The additional trim pieces also had some glass for a bit of realism around the gauges, and that could then be snapped in too. With the GT500 badge now in place, I could move on to putting the radio in and also some more gauges for underneath. The really cool thing about these bigger scale kits is that there is lots of room for extra details. Now luckily in this kit there is already a super big amount of detail included. It even has a functioning glove compartment. With the dash finished for now, I could move on to some more of the floor pieces, adding some of the seat belts and other details like the mats. The seats are put in place and the seat belts were hooked up too. So this Mustang is a GT500, but not just any GT500, this is a Supersnake. So some additional details like a fire extinguisher were also included. After completing the front section, I could move on to the rear, adding a couple of the chrome pieces and also some additional detail parts. Some parts do require a bit of force to snap together. One of the super cool and iconic details for these Mustangs is the foldable rear bench seat. Now this is also included in the kit. It has a super cool small piano hinge that needed to be screwed in place to make it all function. A bit more force was required to snap these pieces together, and then the roll bar could be put on too. Some more seat belts are of course included here as well. They needed to be slid through some holes in the floor pan or in the back seat and applied on the rear side with a bit of force and some glue just to hold them in place nicely. With the rear section of the interior now also finalized, I could move my attention back to the main steering column for this one. There were some wires included for the functioning horn and some of the other pieces. The steering wheel was put on and it was then slid in place. Now if you're a close viewer of the channel, you might notice that this has not yet received the wood graining finish. This was all done before I discovered that technique, or actually just worked it out and figured out how it actually came to life. So that does still need to be applied to this steering wheel, but that will just be pulled out easily further on in the build and I'll just paint it up then. So after I decided to modify the interior, the exterior could of course not be left out. So all of the parts that were applied to some of the exterior pieces were dismantled again, and then I could start the paint stripping process, but that is for another time. Now since this is not your ordinary kit and it's also pretty big, stripping all of the paint and repainting it will take a bit of time, so just be patient with me. I will be posting the updates as soon as I have them, but it can take a little while for those to come of course. In the next episode I will move on to the chassis and engine and hopefully combine that with the interior before of course moving on to the exterior work.